In 2001, George Bush enacted a series of tax cuts that saved the average American family of four about $2,200 a year. It was signed on a 10-year temporary plan, and since 2011 is right around the corner, there's much debate over whether or not to reinstate the tax cuts for another term. The claim I'm responding to is that tax cuts, if they're allowed to expire, then the American economy will be thrown into further turmoil on the subclaim that it mainly affects the middle class and allows them less spending money to stimulate small and local businesses. I'm going to respond to this first by challenging the evidence, then the reasoning behind the claim, and I'll finish off by naming a few counterclaims of my own. So to begin, let's focus on the main point of the argument, that the middle and lower classes hold the basis, or the lower and middle classes hold the basis of the argument on the grounds that these classes make up the majority of the population, and if they're affected negatively, then the entire economy is negatively affected. This is true, but according to Obama's tax plan for 2011, he says that the taxes will not be raised for those families who earn less than $250,000 a year, which completely exempts all lower and middle class from the expiration of these tax cuts, which kind of wipes out the body of the argument. And so secondly, the challenge of the reasoning behind the argument, I'd like to point out that I'd like to turn the attention to the claim that if people have more money from not paying taxes, then they will spend more money stimulating small and local businesses, and as a consequence, the economy. It's highly skeptical as to whether or not this form of supply-side economics even works, and there's no evidence to prove that over the past 10 years of the Bush tax cuts that it has proven beneficial. Supply-side economics, in my opinion, is a good idea, but I would say for that it to work, the participation of the population is key. For example, if people are feeling the pressures of the economy and do not fully believe that the supply-side economics will help the economy to recover, then they'll retain a defensive nature and take advantage of the extra money and probably put it in their pocket with a bank, and not put it, which doesn't help the economy any more than before. But if people are willing to be a little bit less defensive and put a little confidence in the economy and buy a little more, then there's a legitimate chance for this tactic to work. And at this point in time, however, I would say that the majority of Americans have a negative view of the strength of our economy and would probably not spend the money, at least not in local businesses. They'd probably just paid off their own debts. For my counterclaim, I would like to start off by restating that there's no definitive evidence that these tax cuts really do stimulate the economy in the first place or even have a positive effect. And George Bush's own CEA chair, Greg Mankiw, replies on the issue of such a large supply-side effect that they would raise revenue, and he says, "I did not find such a claim credible based on the available evidence. I never have, and I still don't." So the head of the Council of Economic Advisors doesn't even believe that the tax cuts have a large beneficial impact on the economy. So how could allowing them to expire have a negative effect on the economy? Secondly, when taxes are cut, then the government obviously does not get this money. And according to the Congressional Budget Office, or the CBO, between the years of 2001 and 2005, the deficit increased by about $539 billion, of which 48% of that could be directly attributed to the tax cuts. The CBO also calculates that if the tax cuts are kept in place for all citizens, rich and poor, the National Treasury will lose an estimated $3.28 trillion between the years of 2011 and 2018. And even with Obama's plan to only raise the taxes on those who are most wealthy or earning above $250,000 a year, the tax cuts will cost the Treasury an estimated $2.2 trillion over the next 10 years. These pieces of evidence suggest that the tax cuts actually hurt the economy rather than help it. So in conclusion, the issue of the expiring Bush tax cuts were not fully researched, since expiring tax cuts will mainly influence the upper class rather than the middle and lower classes. The reasoning behind the argument was not fully supported with evidence, to prove the point, and the expiring tax cuts can actually save the government trillions of dollars.
All right, well, you start with some background information. That's fine. You label what the secondary issues are going to be. They're okay. The assumption on the first point is partially explained, but I think you're making a policy argument when you start contrasting to the Obama alternative and how they are going to apply the tax issues there. So I think that that's, it may not have been resolved completely. I think you do have a good hypothetical there that, in fact, it's not likely that we are going to lose the tax cuts entirely. So make the argument that the advocate has assumed that that's what's going to happen, and there's reason to believe that maybe something different would actually happen. The challenge to the effectiveness of the tax cuts, I think, as an economic benefit is basically asserted on your point. The one piece of evidence that you have that applies to that really seems to be talking about revenues to the government as opposed to benefits to the economy. Everything else is, just like I said, some reasonable questions about supply side economics, but not necessarily any data that suggests that it hasn't had any beneficial impact. The argument that the government, I think, suffers, I think you do have better evidence on that there is perhaps a drain on revenues to the government, and then you've got this estimate by the CBO that comes in at the end about what the long-term drawback is to government revenues. Of course, if the argument is about economic struggle, then what you need to do is you need to have some information that shows that the government spending is more effective than the spending of this money by the private sector, or you need a stronger argument that the private sector would fail to spend the money in a way that would be productive, and the government would then spend it in more productive ways. I think that that's kind of the underlying crux of that last argument. A little more audience contact would help enhance your credibility too. All right, thank you.